Hey guys, Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. Today I've got a knife that I have been excited about since I heard about it. Since there was a pre-order for this, I've been kind of watching and thinking, hey, that would be an awesome knife to have. And this is the Southard Tolk. Now, I'm a fan of Brad Southard, and probably you are too. Very, very popular maker. Extremely difficult to get a knife from him, okay, just because his books are very, very full and he's very, very popular. Now, probably many of you are familiar with the Spyderco Southard. Great knife. I keep trying them, and I like the Southard, and I think I've got a review on here that's very positive. A little bit small for me, but overall a great knife. I just can't seem to hold on to them. I think I've had 3 and they just kind of keep moving along. But so, you know, that tells you I do like Brad Southard. I love the flipping action on that knife. And so getting one of his mid-techs was something that I was really, really interested in and have been for some time. So that's sort of the background to my interest in this knife. Just the straight background is, you know, Brad Southard, just a very popular knife maker. When the Spyderco Southard came out, obviously he gained a considerable amount of name recognition. So that was just a good business choice for him to go ahead at that point and come out with his Performance series, which are sort of a lower price point, sort of mid-tech level offering from Brad. Now, what's cool about these knives is you get a knife that's designed and kind of built by Brad Southard. You get the great flipping action, you get the typical Southard blade shape that you're used to seeing, that overall sort of curve to the knife that's very, very attractive. Okay, but you get it at a much lower price point than, you know, the thousands you'd be paying for a custom. Plus, there's much more availability. Okay, so there's a lot more out there. Not that these are just everywhere, that anybody who's ever, you know, thought of getting one could have one. But if you're interested in Brad Southard, you could probably lay your hands on one of these without too much difficulty. So, I've got to tell you that, you know, my excitement and my interest in this knife did not diminish when I actually got one and got it in hand, okay? There's been no real disappointment on my part after getting and using this knife and trying it out and carrying it quite a lot. And there are a lot of reasons for that. One of them is the size and weight. You guys know I like bigger knives, so the other knife that Brad offered is, I think, the Avo, and I'm not sure, that might be discontinued. But it was about the same size as the Southard, and so a little too small for me. So, but this at nearly 9 inches, 8 7/8 inches, was perfect. I'm like, that's awesome. And so I was very excited to check this out, and it does not disappoint. It's definitely a full-size folding knife, and the size is right there where I like it to be. The blade length on this is 3 7/8 inches. The handle is 5 inches. And the weight on that, now here's the really impressive part about this. The weight on this is 4.7 ounces. Now let me remind you again, this is almost 9 inches and it's a titanium frame lock. Okay, go, you know, pull up your browser and go search Google for large titanium frame locks, you know, and if you check out all kinds of stuff, there's stuff from ZT and the stuff from, you know, those Chinese, high-end Chinese blades that are coming out now from Riat Knives and Kaiser. You know, there's a lot of big titanium frame locks out there, but none of them are under 5 ounces. So that is a real achievement, and it's done by heavily milling out the titanium scale. So I'll show you this again when we zoom in, but inside of these scales, if you look here where my finger is and here, and I'll zoom in a few minutes and try to show you that, there's big milled out sections of the scale which really reduce the weight and bring this in at that 4.7 ounces. So this thing carries extremely well. It's very, very hand filling, and yet every time you hold it, you go, this knife is not as heavy as I think it should be. Okay, when you look at it and when you pick it up, you're like, oh yeah, you know, pretty cool titanium frame lock, but then when you pick it up, you're like, whoa, why is it so light? And so the weight on this is phenomenal. Now, in addition to very lightweight, it's also quite a thin profile, which means this carries in pocket exceptionally well. Okay, so all of those things are things, you know, you guys can tell, I think, after I give you some of those things, just why I like this. I love large knives. I love when knives have a great blade to handle ratio, and this does. Let me show you as I partially close that. There's the end of the handle, right where my finger is, and look how close that blade is. I mean, you've used up every bit of handle. So just a lot to really, really like about this knife. And we've only talked about the size and weight so far, okay? Let me get into some comparisons now before we get into the rest of the discussion about this knife. So what have I got here? I think the Spyderco Military, if you're a guy who likes big knives and you like titanium frame locks, this honestly is my favorite Spyderco. I just love the TI Military, and it compares fairly well to the Tolk. You can see that the Tolk is smaller, but one of the cool things about it is if you look at how much cutting edge these two knives have, the Tolk actually has more cutting edge than the Military. And of course, many people have commented before, guys, that the Military and the paramilitary maybe are not that efficient in blade to handle ratio. That's fine for me, okay? I'm not at all complaining about that, but I love it when a knife does do a great job of balancing out or giving you a lot of blade in the smallest handle that they can get away with. Okay, so there's the Military. Probably lots of people are familiar with that. A couple of cold steels here. Here's a Recon 1. Many people are familiar with the Recon 1, so you can kind of see how those two compare to one another. Again, the cutting edge is about the same, even though the Recon 1 is considerably larger. Now here's another very popular, very cool cold steel knife. You can see it is shorter than the Avo. Okay. One more comparison for you, and I've got this here for another reason, but some of you might be familiar with the Ferrum Forge Ferrex, and I love this knife. There'll be a couple things that I point out on here that I would like to see here, but you can, since it's here, we may as well use it for another size comparison as well. So that's the comparison, and that's the size and weight. And so you can see just right off the bat, size and weight is phenomenal on this knife, and that's one of the things that really stands out as a very good feature on this knife is the size and weight, the blade length, the handle ratio, all that stuff is definitely a real win. So let's go ahead and zoom in. We'll talk about first the blade and then the lockup in the handle the way we normally do. Okay, so come on in. There we go. Let me move my hand here a little bit. Okay, so there we go. There is a close-up view of this knife. You can see that this blade is a flat grind with a satin finish, stone wash here on the flats, nice titanium thumb stud there. This blade shape is extremely useful. And I can tell you, one of the things, I don't always do this, and I've said, hey, I don't normally do this, but if I have the Tolk in my pocket, I will often use it for food prep because it's extremely good. You've got this nice full flat grind, you've got lots of length there, and so this knife works really well for any kind of slicing task. And so I use it for that. I use it if I'm, cutting up bananas or whatever, green peppers or apples. In addition to that, of course, because it's nice and thin behind the edge, you've got a good ability to penetrate any kind of material, whether it's cardboard or wood carving or whatever else. That edge geometry is excellent. Now the steel here is CTS XHP, which, as you guys know, is the same steel that Cold Steel is using on their knives now. Although I will say that the Southard, when you sharpen it, definitely feels harder. Okay, it's a little harder to put an edge on this than on your, maybe you've got the new Ultimate Hunter or whatever. That's great, and so and they do a decent job, but the Tolk is definitely a little harder and therefore just a little tougher to get a good edge, but it's not difficult at all. Okay, the edge is actually quite good, and the edge geometry is phenomenal. Now I do like the blade shape on this. There's one thing here that I kind of feel like is maybe missing, and that is a choil. I think there's enough blade length here that you could put a choil right here in front of the flipper, and it would actually feel really good, and that indent on the back of the blade would kind of work with that sort of choked up grip. I'm not really doing it because I would cut my finger, okay guys? So that's why I'm kind of holding this in a weird way. I can rest my finger gently. You can see how it would work. This is fine, and I will say in this grip, which is how I mostly use the knife, your thumb does kind of feel like it's just meant to be there. And we'll talk about ergonomics, of course, in a few more minutes when we get a little further down the knife. So that's the blade, CTS XHP blade, this sort of cool modified draw point that we're used to seeing from Southard, and a nice, very high flat grind. So what about lockup and deployment? Well, one of the things that Brad is famous for is the flipping action on his knives, and this knife is no exception. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can see that a little bit better. Extremely smooth ball bearing pivot and flips out just phenomenally. I tried to see if I can do it really light just to show you how easy it is. So that was a fairly light one, and if you give it just a little bit of oomph, it's going to flip out really fast. So the detent on this and the flipping action is phenomenal, and Brad Southard is known for that, so we sort of would expect that on this blade. One thing that's cool is these thumb studs do work very well to deploy the knife either quickly or a little more slowly. You can see if you don't want to flip the knife out, you want to be a little more discreet about opening your knife, you can easily flip it out slowly and carefully. The one thing I will say that's odd about deployment on this is notice the pivot is here and the thumb stud is here. So let me see if I have anything that can be a straight edge. I guess I don't. A piece of paper, I guess I'll have to work. So if I hold this and kind of go from center to center, see how the angle is actually quite steep. Very, 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 very steep angle on this, which means when you open this, you sort of have to push out rather than up. On a lot of folders, if you want to deploy the knife quickly, what you do is you push kind of up in an upward direction or in this direction, and the knife will open up nice and quick for you. If you see that doesn't work as well on this knife, you sort of have to push out, okay, and then it works a little better. And that's because of the relationship, the geometry between the pivot and the thumb stud, okay? Not a big deal, but it's just something you kind of have to get used to. And it looks a little odd when you close the knife. The distance between the pivot and the thumb stud just seems a little big, okay? And it is. It's in a little different position than what probably you're used to seeing on most knives. So that's deployment. What about lockup? And of course, I should maybe reiterate the fact that, yeah, it flips amazingly well, and Brad Southard is known for that. I've got to say this, I really think it's cool, and I may do a video on this just because I think it's really cool when a knife maker is able to use a small flipper like this, where it's not this massive thing jutting out like what you see on the Ferrex. You've got just this small, fairly discreet flipper, and it works extremely well. Okay, compare that to a lot of flippers out there, and there are a few like the Bokers. What can I think? The Boker Quakin, for example, has a small flipper and still flips really well. The Boker Federal, same thing, small flipper and flips really well. It's a real achievement when a knife maker is able to do that. And so I really appreciate the flipping action on this. And as I've said a couple of times already, Brad Southard is kind of famous for having very, very good flipping action on his knives. And that's largely a function of this geometry, okay? Where the pivot is versus where the flipper mechanism is. If you get that wrong, you'll have people complaining about how the knife flips, but this works really, really well. All right, now the lock, here's the lock bar over here. Typical titanium frame lock, guys. You can see the relief cut is fairly thin, a little thinner than I like to see. Not the end of the world. Again, my standard is the Ferrex. And again, the Ferrex, it looks really, really thin, okay? It's actually, it looks really, really thick. It's a little thinner than it looks because what they've done is actually milled a hole into here. So it's like an I-beam structure. Very, very, because of that, it's going to be very, very strong. So let's come back to the Southard. You can see it's a little thinner there. Not the end of the world. The knife still works really, really well. The lockup is very, very solid. And by the way, that's one of the things you do expect from a mid-tech. from a knife of this price point and quality level is pretty solid lockup, and it does deliver. Now, I would like to have seen a lock bar insert here. The fact that there isn't one isn't the end of the world or anything, but it would just have been nice to see. Let me, since we're talking about the handle, let me see if I can zoom in on one side of the knife or the other. Bear with me here for a second, guys. I'm going to try to show you this. Okay, so if I can catch the light just right, probably right around there. Come on, focus. There we go. You should maybe be able to see inside of that handle and see those milled out holes that are in there that are reducing the weight on this knife considerably. Maybe right about at that angle, and you can see there in the top as well. I don't know if you'll be able to see that, otherwise you'll just have to take my word for it. Okay, so let's go back and finish off the rest of our discussion. Let's see, we've talked about the lock. Yeah, the lock bar works good. This jimping actually does catch your thumb really, really nicely. And so yeah, it's just about right. The lockup is very early. Probably this lock face is carbonized. Okay, I'm guessing a little bit there, but it has not moved at all, which, you know, is strange. And I've flipped this. This is a knife that is addictive to flip, and I've flipped it hundreds, if not thousands of times. And so by this time, most of my titanium frame locks would have worn just a little bit, but it hasn't moved at all since I've gotten it. Now, talked about the lock bar, talked about the detent is one of the things I should have mentioned. Detent is very, very good. And one of the ways you can always measure that is, you know, if you get a knife that flips well, oftentimes it doesn't work to deploy with thumb studs very well, but this works really, really well. There you go. You can see how nicely I can deploy that with either and by the way, this is left-handed. So you can see how well I can deploy that either with the flipper or with my thumb. And that's a testament to the detent being set basically perfectly. Okay, this is really, really nice the way the detent is set. I didn't mention that when we were in lockup and deployment, so I wanted to go back and touch on that. Now, let's get to the handle finally. The ergonomics on this are very, very good. Okay, this is a knife that I would put in a class, and there are a few knives that come to mind. The Cold Steel American Lawman, the Spyderco Paramilitary 2, the Zero Tolerance 0560. These are knives that when you hold them in your hand, they just become an extension of you. Okay, they just mold so perfectly to the hand, and this knife goes in that category with them. It just feels so natural. And by the way, I want to point this out, guys. This is much more comfortable. The ergonomics are a huge improvement over the Spyderco Southard. And I think the ergonomics on the Spyderco Southard are good. So if you've got a Spyderco Southard and you feel that, know that this is even better, okay? And now I do kind of like large knives, but the ergos on this really, really are phenomenal. It just feels like it was meant to be in your hand. Now, reverse grip is still good, and there is some jimping here on the back end of the handle there. I don't find I would be more inclined to do this with a reverse grip. The only grip that is not perfect is, you know, if you're going to reach out and do a draw cut back towards you, this is not ideal, okay? But every other grip that you can use on this knife is very, very comfortable and works really, really well. So I think that's most of the handle features I've talked about. There you can see the titanium standoffs there, the lanyard hole, you know, nothing really to write home about. 550 cord would fit, no problem. I do want to talk about the pocket clip. It is a spring clip. And what's nice about it is the tension. And this is one of the things that you kind of expect at a knife of this caliber, is some little things like the pocket clip to be extremely well done. And in this case, it's perfect. It goes in and out of pocket very comfortably, very quickly, and very easily, while at the same time retaining in pocket very well. So that's kind of something that we expect, okay guys? I want to see that pocket clip done in such a way that, hey, I'm not having a hard time getting it in a pocket. It just goes in when I want it, comes out when I want it. Otherwise, everything is great. One last note, and that is on the jimping before we move on from ergonomics. Jimping on the back of this blade is very, very good. Really, really grippy. you know, it doesn't feel like it's going to tear my thumbs apart, but I know, hey, that's solid. I'm locked in. All right. And the same is true of the jimping on the lock bar. It's just very good. Now, I will say I like slightly more aggressive jimping. So for some people, maybe they'll say, hey, it's too much. And I think I have heard some comments about that on the flipper. There are a couple little there's just like 2 little jimps there, and they catch your finger like crazy. And so, yeah, you could say, well, it catches a little too well, and now my finger's sore. I don't know. My thinking about that is sort of man up, because it's not a super hard detent on this either. So it's not like you're having to push so hard on that detent that, you know, your fingers are going to fall off or anything. So if you haven't figured it out by now, and I imagine you probably have, I think this is a phenomenal blade. I really, really like it. The size, the weight, the blade shape, just the comfort in hand, everything about this knife is just really, really well done. Okay, I really don't have any complaints other than, you know, the lock bar insert there, which is not the end of the world. Otherwise, phenomenal blade. So, that's my take on the Brad Southard Tolk. Very, very impressive. And it is, I don't think I mentioned this throughout the whole video, so if you're still watching, what Brad calls his mid-techs are his performance series. And so, yeah, very, very well done. I don't have anything to complain about with this knife. I really like every single thing about it. Okay, so there you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoy seeing some of these, you know, slightly more expensive knives, you know, and I'm not Jim Skeleton, and I'm not, you know, Pio Leung or whatever, however you pronounce it, or Epic Snuggle Bunny, and I never will be, okay? But I do like from time to time to check out and to have some of these really slightly higher end pieces. I like them for my collection. I like them to use and carry. And so I hope you enjoy seeing those videos. We'll talk to you soon, guys.